Kia ora and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with New Zealand artists. I'm your host, Mandy Yarkich. These conversations are intimate, uplifting and insightful. The guests on this show have absolutely enriched my life, and I'm sure their stories will have the same effect on you. Thank you so much for joining me to listen to these amazing people speak about what drives them, the way they work, and their personal takes on life. Hi, and welcome back to Creative Matters. This is episode 61 and is the first episode in season 3, which is generously brought to you by Creative Communities Scheme Auckland. This week we are speaking with Tiffany Singh. Tiffany is a social practice artist specialising in socially engaged art outcomes. Her practice explores relationships and engagement between arts, culture, health and well-being. She was born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, of Indian and Pacific descent, and is currently living in London, UK. Tiffany's work positions the arts as a vital contributor to health and well-being by utilising a fine art framework. Her interests in cultural preservation combined with an integrated social discourse has seen her use the arts as a vehicle for education, outreach and empowerment. Tiffany talks passionately about her priority to make work that facilitates other people to be seen and heard, how she highlights and empowers marginalised communities, how her Buddhism beliefs and culture inform her practice, and the ways she uses colour, space, materiality, sound and smell to connect and communicate. You can see process videos of Tiffany's work on our blog at creativematters.co.nz. We are calling by Zoom to London, and sometimes some of the reception or the internet connection isn't the best, but bear with me. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy Tiffany's story, and it is absolutely worth listening to. Kia ora, Tiffany.
Kia ora.
Nice to see you, and it's been a long time coming. We've been communicating for some time, and it's really, really lovely to finally meet you.
I think maybe when we first started, I was in Taiwan, I think.
Yes, you were.
On the residency. So we've been chatting through different countries and different time zones for a couple of months.
We have, and here we are now. I'm in the dark at 10 o'clock at night in New Zealand. And you're in London in the morning. You've just sent your child off to daycare. And I've got a snoring dog and more porks in the background. And so it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Creative Matters.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here and be a part of what you do, which is an amazing contribution to enable people to understand a little bit more about the backstory of what we create.
Yeah, thank you. So you've got an incredibly varied, amazing practice. I first actually met you, I don't know if you remember, but in 2012, I was an art educator at Auckland Art Gallery and was working in that learning centre space where you installed your beautiful work. Ever since then, I've been following your journey and you're just so inspirational. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all about how you got to this place. So can you just go back to when you were a child, Tiffany?
Sure. I have just turned 44 yesterday on Monday, on Halloween. So it's quite a long time ago now to go back into the recesses. But I had a very simple childhood. It was just my mum and myself growing up in Northcote on the North Shore of Auckland. And I was very fortunate that my mum recognised quite early on that I wasn't into sports and I wasn't an athletic child and that I had a lens towards creative practice. So my mum put me into Kristen which at the time was one of the new schools on the North Shore, and it was created through parents that were trying to find an alternative to the heavily sports-based culture of New Zealand, and the focus was on performing arts and arts alongside academia. So for me, it was such a blessing to actually be in an environment where I didn't feel like there was something wrong with me because I wasn't into sports, and then I could apply myself in a creative way. So for most of my schooling life, my subjects were photography and graphic design and painting and all the art subjects. So I think my only core subjects was English for the latter part of my schooling years. So from quite an early age, it really has been the thing that I have focused on. Obviously, at that stage, it was a little bit of a struggle because the core subjects were still two-dimensional and quite often drawing or painting based, as to which neither of which I can do. I can't draw and I can't paint.
Really? How interesting.
So no, not at all. So it's and it still comes up every time we have a conversation about installing a work or designing anything. I still have to make an apology for my incredibly crude drawings.
Oh, I'm sure you actually can.
I have tried. I think my speciality is three-dimensional space. So there is something that happens, and I'm also terrible at working off floor plans. So I find it very hard I need to feel it. The work comes from such a sensory perception that in both the colour and the emotive quality of the work, that until I actually stand in the physical space, it's very hard for me to imagine or see what is going to be there. It's really only until I can have a physical relationship with the light quality, the spatial dimensions, and can relate to it as a physical entity in the space. And then it becomes crystal clear immediately. I can see the work in the space, but I have to be in the space to be doing that, which is something that I'm still trying to work through, because especially during COVID and during lockdown, it wasn't possible to do that.
Yeah.
So it was quite challenging for me to have to almost retrain my brain to work in an imaginary space. So the other space for me that is critical is the dream space. That if I don't dream a work and I can't see it in my subconscious really, really clearly, I don't entirely trust that it's going to manifest. So it's kind of I guess it's the top of my head. It's a very intuitive space that the work comes through.
Yeah.
And that is very much related to the feeling and the sensation of the space. Most of the time when I work internationally, the work that I have proposed changes when I get on site for the same reasons, whether that's the dimensions or the relationship, but then it's also dependent on the culture and the land and the people that you're working with that have an influence on what needs to happen in that space.
Unusual, and you wouldn't have been seeing a lot of that kind of work around you. So what were you feeling at that time? Did you think that you really wanted to explore that? Was that already in your head, or was that something that came a bit later?
It was definitely something that came a bit later. I think that has to do with two things. One, as you said, exposure to understanding the different modes of working creatively in terms of the diversity of arts practice. At that stage, it was still quite traditional. There was no conversation around social practice or anything like that. It was not on the table at all. So at that stage, when I left school, I was a graphic designer. I became a graphic designer.
Right.
Because I was probably focused on supporting myself and being independent, which has always been a huge thing for me. And at that stage, it probably made the most sense that it was a creative practice that was some form of, at the time, I thought quite useful application of creativity until I got into the industry and then realised that I was using my creativity to sell product that I didn't necessarily believe in.
Yeah.
And it became massively ethical for me, and I left. And then I went travelling. I started at Elam in second year when I was 24. So later, when I left my high school, I came to London. I travelled from 18 to 22, left New Zealand and travelled through South America and Europe and the UK for those 3 years, and then came back and went to university. And at that point, there was still no conversation of social practice on the table. I was still struggling with two-dimensional, domestic scale, commercial artwork. I've never really fitted into the dealer gallery model. It's always been quite problematic for me and for the market of how to deal with me.
Yeah, it's very different.
And it's always been kind of a hard sell around how to present or sell social practice work as well, because quite often it's the process that is more important than the outcome.
Yeah.
So in terms of market and commercial positioning, that's been quite challenging. I don't think we've really had the framework around it to understand it yet, because there's still a focus on art as the object and of handing over money and getting something back. So that's still something that I struggle with and am working through. So most of my money comes from commissions or from commissions from festivals or museums or public galleries or funding. So I still really haven't developed a market per se. So it's still an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean it is such an interesting practice in that way, and it is, I guess it's quite different. You know, there's not that many artists from New Zealand anyway working in the way that you work. So, I mean, can you actually explain how you work and what kind of artist you are for people who aren't familiar with your work?
Sure. Just going back to the Elam thing, it was really interesting because it was kind of the first opportunity that I had to work in three-dimensional space of having a studio and having space to work like that. But obviously you don't have a lot of money for materials and you don't have a lot of space for scale. So it wasn't really until I got offered the Sydney Biennale exhibition, which was in 2012, that I actually had the first time I was given budget and scale to work with. So that was hugely formative to actually be able to be given 2 sites on 2 different spaces that were really large scale to work with. And that really cemented something for me. It really, especially working in that way with an intuitive spiritual relationship to the space and to the work, and working with sound and sacred objects, and it was definitely the scale that triggered something for me for sure.
Yeah.
But
and what was that actual what was the project or the work that you did for the Sydney Biennale?
That was Knock on the Sky, Listen to the Sound. So that was a social practice project, and the way that I worked was school children initially in Sydney. And it was replicated off a smaller work that was done through Enjoy Gallery Space in Wellington in the Douse in the years previously to that for the Crystal City exhibition. That was the contemporary Asian art exhibition curated by Emma Bugden. And the idea was that there was thousands of wind chimes in the courtyard at the Douse. And that was like the pilgrimage site, and they were calling the chimes home, and there was other chimes at Enjoy, and you could go into Enjoy Gallery and take one of the wind chimes away and paint it and decorate that and document that, and then take it on a journey back to the Douse. And there was a tree in the gallery that you could hang the wind chimes back on. So one space became empty and the other space became full, and the pilgrimage through audience participation was documented from the sites. So it was similar to that for Sydney, that the pilgrimage site was on Cockatoo Island, and then the beginning work there where you could come and take one of the wind chimes from was at Pier 2-3 down in Circular Quay. So it was a large scale of a bubby.
Yeah, that's incredible. And how did they, I mean, you said it was one of your sort of first big installations. How did they actually find you?
I think the curator from the Sydney, there's 2 curators from that year, and they came over to New Zealand and met with Deborah White. And it was Deborah that connected them to me. I think they went to the Douse as well when that show was on and saw the work in the courtyard with the wind chimes. So I think they must have been over earlier in 2011 and seen the work at the Douse.
Yeah.
And because it was the Sydney Biennale curatorial concept that year was all our relations. So there was that relation to pilgrimage and to different ethnicities, and there was quite a lot of work that was based in the ephemeral realm. So it was a good connection to that, and also the sound aspect. Sound and sense is something I really try and work with as much as possible. It's really important to me that the artwork is as inclusive as possible. So sound and colour and scent are amazing devices to be able to use for visually impaired people to give them access to the work.
That's so amazing. And it's something that isn't considered very often by artists, I guess. Yeah, it's really lovely. And so, just going back to my question earlier, for people who aren't familiar with your work,
I think installation is probably the medium that the social practice happens through. I guess that's the physical form that it quite often takes. As the outcome of the artwork. But the social practice, the key to the social practice is that it's working with communities largely marginalised or who don't have a large platform for voice and who are quite often misunderstood. So for me, the most important thing is to bring equality and provide a space for other people's voices to be heard. So in a lot of ways, the work is kind of the vehicle. The physical work is the vehicle for that to happen through. So my job is really not to make work about what I think about. It's more about making work that facilitates other people to be seen and heard. That is really the priority for me as an artist, is to be useful through a creative platform to support other people that don't have the same access to be heard, or where that's misunderstood. Or, I would say largely for me, the work comes out of being really upset or being really unhappy about the state of the world and how people are treated and what's going on in it, and trying to find some ways to mediate that space in a positive way that is supportive for and to other people. So a lot of it comes out of my frustration. A lot of it comes out of my the feelings of injustice that operate within us, or looking at where I think the social ills are and trying to assess what I could do to be beneficial in that space, to have a conversation that a lot of people aren't hearing. I think possibly Journey of a Million Miles is a really good example of that work. That work was in Headland Sculpture in the Gulf in 2017. And I worked with the Resettled Community Coalition of New Zealand, which most people refer to as the refugee community, but that term unto itself is incorrect because we don't have refugees in New Zealand. Once the resettled community is granted citizenship, they are given a passport, so they are New Zealanders. So the language around that is very misleading and very isolating. So at the time there was a lot of conversations about increasing the quota of the resettled community to New Zealand, to Aotearoa, and there was quite a lot of backlash to that suggestion because a lot of the conversation was based on the politics of the cost of resettling people. And that was the conversation that was dominating the media. And we also are in a situation in New Zealand where, because we are a small population, there are multiple voices, and there are a few voices on multiple platforms. So you have similar people on the news to on the radio to writing the papers. So once you have an opinion, that opinion is everywhere, and it's harder to get a diverse cross-section of narrative within that space when it's monopolized by a few people. So I thought it was really important to try and bring a counter-narrative to that dialogue. And by doing that, the only way to really do that is talk to the people who are actually involved and to hear their side of the conversation, and to also educate the rest of Aotearoa about what the resettled community brings to our country, which is huge, and those conversations just weren't happening. So it's works like that come from a place of feeling like there's communities that are disenfranchised, that aren't being heard, that aren't being, I guess, in some ways fairly represented. In terms of what did that work look like? What was that all about? So it was 5 upcycled dinghies that stood up, and they were turned into art objects. They had sculptural aspects on the outside of them, and textile and fabrics and mats underneath them, and cushions and pillows. And we recorded the stories. The resettled community wrote the stories in 4 parts about what it was like, where they came from, how they became refugees, how they sought refuge within New Zealand, and what their lives had been like once they had resettled to Aotearoa. So it was each story was in 4 parts. It was a very similar mechanism for each person, so it followed. But then we worked with people in media, like Jessie Mulligan and who else was there? Frankie Stevens and Victor Roger, quite prominent people who were in media whose voices were really well known, John Hawkesby. And we gave them the stories, and they re-recorded the stories to offset the bias around accent, so that the stories that you listened to were in New Zealand accents, well-known voices that we were used to hearing on the news or in media. So people paid attention to the voices because they were familiar, but offset the bias of accent. So it presented as stories of New Zealanders, which is what the resettled community is now that they live here.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really clever.
So it was very powerful, and there was over 50,000 people that visited Headland Sculpture in the Gulf that year. So in terms of that, the positioning for me of social practice is pivotal around well-being and education, that it's twofold, that it's as beneficial for the people that participate and as beneficial for the audience that encounter the work.
You're educating the audience. Yeah,
and not through my perspective, but through the perspective of people who are truly involved, and whose stories are often misunderstood or not heard. So there's a transparency and there's an honesty, and it largely, in a lot of ways, my job is to facilitate that.
And how do you go about that process, Tiffany? I mean, how do you actually find the people and sort of bring it all together? And, I guess financially, is it a funded project, or, how does that actually come together?
Yeah, in both ways. Funding from multiple sources. The Creative Community Scheme has been very useful in terms of the seed funding to enable me to have conversations with the communities and go and see them and spend time, because a lot of a lot of the process is building trust.
Yeah.
A lot of that process is trying to explain to communities who have often been misunderstood or mistreated that an arts platform could potentially be beneficial for them, and gaining trust in that way and spending time with people, and also enabling them to understand that it's not a one-off engagement, that there is a sustainable practice around that is valued and taken care of. Usually there's a contract of a memorandum of understanding, so that both parties know whose role is what and what the role of the artwork is, and what the parameters around that are. And then once that first stage has been established, then I usually apply for funding to develop it, after I've got that initial seed partnership developed.
Which must be so hard for you, because you're putting in so much love and passion and time into a project that you want to develop, but then you are still kind of having to make that application, which is hard in itself, and then, have it accepted. So that sort of adds a whole other dimension to your work, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the frameworks that the works are realised within, the calibre of those is vital. Headland sculpture in the Gulf, or, in the case of one of the works that you have the images of, the Fly Me Up to Where You Are, the work with the children. That's happened under the Auckland Festival, Christchurch Festival, Wellington Festival, New Zealand Festival, Darwin Festival, and next year the Melbourne Festival. So they're all reputable festivals and houses for the projects to be realised in. So that is vital. That is really vital, that the calibre of those are respected and visible. And obviously I have the support of the festivals to make that happen. Yeah. So, that project is still going. That's been going since 2010. Yeah, the last iteration of the project was in Darwin in 2021, which was very interesting because it was over COVID, during COVID, and Black Lives Matter.
Can you tell us? Can you tell us about that project?
So that project is developed in schools through festivals as an education outcome. It's an education kit that the schools can sign up for, and then we go into the schools and facilitate the project. So it's in New Zealand, it was realised in decile 1 and 2 schools, so it was the lower end of the spectrum. So again, that very strong positioning between education and wellbeing. Wellbeing, education, outreach for the children, but also education for audiences. At the time when I started the project in 2010, there wasn't the narrative or the conversation around child poverty in New Zealand like there is now. It wasn't being talked about. It wasn't being acknowledged in the same way that it is today. So it was probably the hardest project I've ever done. I really didn't expect the outcome to be so heartbreaking. It was very, very emotional.
Yeah, that would have been quite. So the actual project is flags that get hung.
Yeah, so
flags.
Yeah, so there's an education kit. So it starts with a mind map, and there's a mind map with a bubble in the middle where you draw yourself as the child, and then around the outside there's speech bubbles of what are your hopes and dreams for yourself, your family, the world, the environment, and your community. So the children fill that out. There's films, there's books, there's full education resources to support those questions, because largely you're talking to children who have never talked about their future, who have never been asked what they want to do when they grow up. They don't have the capacity to understand that things can be any different from the way that it is. So their acceptance of the hardship is incredibly detrimental, because the mindset is, this is how it is, this is how it's always going to be. So, and that's it. that's my lot. So I'm not going to try and change it. I don't need to go to school. My life's never going to be any different from how it is now. So what we're trying to do is empower them to acknowledge that they are in a country where they have access to education and healthcare, which unto itself is a huge privilege, and try and get them to start talking about some of their hopes and dreams for the future, and try and kickstart that cognitive conversation around having dreams and having hopes and actually being able to see a future for themselves outside of the reality that they're in. And that is really challenging, and again based around trust. So because we're asking them to be so honest about their realities, there's a lot of fear around that they don't want to get their families in trouble. They don't want to talk about what's going on at home. They don't want to, and because it's in the environments where it is like that for all of the children, it becomes quite normal. It's normalized because everybody's experiencing it. So the level of basic needs that was coming out of the project was phenomenal. So they do that. They fill out the hopes and dreams sheet, and then they turn that over, and we ask them to choose one of their answers and convert that into visual imagery. So on the back of that mind map, they turn one of their answers into an image. And then once they've done that, we give each child a piece of the fabric, and they paint that image onto the fabric. So to date, I think there's 32,000 kids that have been a part of the project.
Wow, that's incredible. I can imagine that would have been really quite sort of moving to read some of the things that they've come up with. And how did they go with the making the image out of the words? How did they manage to make
really well
connection?
Really well. I mean, they're very supported. You know, it's quite a long process that is unpacked quite well, so that there's no stress around it. There's also the conversation that there's no wrongs or rights. It's not being marked.
Yeah. So
it's taken out of that space of pressure. It's taken out of that space again of giving them a space to feel validated and to have a voice that a lot of them haven't been asked before. You know, I had
did you actually work with, or did you have sort of a group of people working with the students, or did they work with their teachers and then they passed
both
on?
They work with their teachers first, and then once the mind maps have been filled out at the initial stage, then we have a team of people that goes in and realizes that's the second part of the project. So each festival has an education team that goes into the schools, and we take all of the materials, so it's at no cost to the schools, and provide the support for the school to realize the project.
And that's so amazing. I mean, you know, there's benefits on so many levels, like what you're actually doing for the children. I mean, just from my point of view as an educator, you know, you're helping them to connect and engage with art for a start, but then you're also doing all these other incredible things that are good for them in other ways. And then you're creating a thing of beauty which they can go to and connect with as well. I mean, so you've got the hard, gritty stuff that's going on and the hard conversations, but it's presented still in a way of beauty, which is quite an interesting kind of juxtaposition, I guess.
I think one of the most powerful things of the project is for the children seeing the work realised in its final iteration, and understanding that their one small part can become a part of a very large thing that is really powerful.
Yeah.
And seeing that and going through the process of it is quite triggering. You can see them feeling like someone does care and we are listening, and also knowing that there is an audience of many people that sees it is really powerful for them. And it's when you get it as the multiple, when it's en masse like that, and it's completely unmediated, and it's really honest, and in a lot of cases quite upsetting, it is hard as an adult as the audience member to not be really moved by it, because it's, you know, it's not one that you're looking at, it's like 20,000 kids saying we want to have food on the table, you know, like really basic need stuff that I don't think a lot of people expected to see coming out of New Zealand in 2010.
Yeah.
So I think it was a bit of a wake-up call too. I think it was really interesting for people to be like, whoa. Like, a lot of people asked me if I'd made the project in India and brought it back. A lot of people thought what they were seeing had come from a developing country.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? The work that you're doing is probably helping these conversations come to light, and it's making people wake up, which is such an important thing. You know, it really resonates with me as somebody who works with children, and just to be able to create a project that is actually not just about the final result, but, you know, that whole incredible process that you're taking people through, that is so so good for them and so educational for others.
If it's only working for one side, it doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
It has to be as equally beneficial from both sides, from the beginning right through to the end. But it's interesting, a lot of the schools still contact me, even though they don't go through the whole process to make the prayer flags. But a lot of the schools every year still contact me and ask me whether they can use the education kit and the mind map and go through that with the students, because it keys into the teachers so much of what's going on for the children and where they're at and what they need.
Yeah, it's
and it enables them to support them in a different way, which is amazing. And it was really interesting doing it during COVID, because, you know, there's a whole other set of issues, you know, when kids can't go to school and they're at home, and and it's also kind of a space of, it's a therapeutic process for them to be able to actually have something where they can talk about what's going on and see a positive outcome from that. So
when you get commissions like from the Auckland Art Gallery, for example, that one in 2012, was it, I think?
May the rainbow always touch your shoulder.
Yeah. And so that is quite a different thing again, isn't it, I guess? I mean, you're not working with a group of people. I guess you have different sort of aims for a work like that. So can you describe that installation and what that meant to you?
Well, that was one of the first ones as well. That would have been a similar year to Sydney, and it's a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
That work was looking at colour, unpacking colour, the benefits of colour through all different cultures, and the way that colour resonates with us, and the benefits of that. So it was a room full, absolutely full of colour, and I think it was every 2 months we changed out the primary colour, so that the whole room changed and rolled through the rainbow, and people were able to write about what the different colours meant to them, and there was a focus of a particular colour for 2 months at a time, and that rotated throughout the whole year.
Yeah.
So even though it wasn't social practice per se, it was still, you could still engage with it.
Yeah, exactly. And people connected with it in different ways, you know, so you definitely were getting those kind of responses from the audience. And in those ones you had little kind of collections of bottles and flowers and seeds and sort of iconic or icons and lots of little interesting groupings and on shelves, didn't you? So and that is quite a sort of common thread in your work, isn't it, where you sort of bring little collections together. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, I now that I can look at that retrospectively, it was possibly a very, very, very early iteration of Indra's bow that's been at Life Papa, because it was all of the similar materials and the bottles, and looking at like the healing capacity of the natural world, and scent and colour, and focusing on each colour and bringing all of the natural medicines into that space that were in each colour. So in some ways, it is a very early iteration of exploring that work.
And Indra's bow was just the most gorgeous work. I watched a video actually of you installing at Te Papa, which is New Zealand's national museum. So, you know, that in itself is pretty incredible that you're showing your work there. And that was sort of glass orbs and ribbons. And then you collected powders and materials from the kitchen, basically, didn't you? And put them in the glass orbs. That was amazing. What was the process around that?
It was, again, looking at the healing benefits of art. And I think one of the key things with my practice and how I make work is that it's incredibly transparent. There's no tricks, or it's just what you see is what you get. It's very honest like that. It's just, it's very it is what it is in its purest form. So it was looking at different cultures, because my Indian ethnicity has a huge role to play in the work that I make. And looking at all of the things in the natural world that we have access to, and trying to bring the beauty and the potency of the natural world around us into a designed aesthetic that looked incredibly beautiful, smelt incredibly beautiful, but if you unpacked it, was probably what we live and see every day in our lives. Yeah. So it was trying to bring an awareness to the beauty that is around us and the healing benefits that we have access to on a daily basis, and really prioritize that holistic way of living, and thinking about art and creativity and making it accessible and grounding it in our everyday lives, of, you know, that you can potentially open the kitchen cupboards and possibly see most of the things that are in this artwork in your own home, but just looking at it in a different way, of presenting that in a different way that gives it a different value, and positions it as something incredibly special that we often overlook. Yeah,
and it's just that was such a beautiful work. I can't imagine how you actually installed it. I mean, obviously you've got some clever people helping you as well, but just that it's quite a mathematical kind of, you know, the way it was all laid out.
Totally. I think the Te Papa staff were unbelievable. The install team did 3 of the arcs and they were perfect. And I did 1 of them and it was a shambles. They had to go in and fix it for me.
But it must have been so hard. I mean, everything would have had to have been measured so, you know, accurately to get that sort of right effect, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 4. There's only 4 lines in that work, which is really interesting when you see a work like Olorangi, the one that's up in Auckland at the moment in HSBC, which is, you know, I think it's 68 lines. So the density of that compared to the 4 lines in Te Papa, but each arc hangs at a different height. So you kind of get that rainbow arc effect because they're staggered. So it's really strangely enough, maths is not my forte, but
that's what I was thinking.
I have in the last decade got incredibly good at physics and maths.
That's ironic, isn't it? And I'm sure your spatial design skills are improving after, you know, all the work that you've done.
For sure. Yeah, it's an interesting one of where it comes from, because I can just see it in the space, and I don't really know where that comes from. It just kind of is there, which is why it's so critical for me to feel the space.
Yeah. So a lot of your work is site specific, isn't it?
Very much so.
So you go to the space, and then how do you actually develop an idea? How does it come to you?
I think in some ways all the works are iterations of others. They're all connected. They all evolve. Possibly the work that would be the newest in its aesthetic or the most different is probably Total Internal Reflection, because really in a sense, there's no physical anything in that work. It's just light. It's all light.
Yeah.
But then conceptually, it's the same conversation around the colour therapy, the healing, the wellness, the education. It's social practice. It's engaged with. It's, you know, it was really interesting that we collected the data set off that, which is available as open source data. So there's all of those. It's a completely different work in terms of its aesthetic, but it's totally connected to my inquiry around wellbeing and education and, you know, the power of colour.
Totally. And that was at Te Papa as well, wasn't it? The total internal reflection. And in that case, people actually chose a colour that resonated with them, didn't they?
Yeah, so you walk through the black corridor and you push the button and it turns the whole room that colour, and then the light reset to the last 36 people's colour choices. So it was a constant revolving rainbow chosen by audience participation. But it was interesting to watch it over seasons, the way that it shifted over seasons, you know, like there were all the pinks and the oranges and the reds came out in winter.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's incredible. So good. So you've had so many exhibitions, and you've shown your work in all over New Zealand in galleries and museums and sculpture shows, and also in Nepal, Bangkok, Taiwan, Samoa, California, Australia, you know, all over the place, probably other places as well. And then you've done all these different festivals, particularly in Aotearoa, but in other places as well. And then you've also had 13 artist residencies since 2011.
The residencies are kind of, they're my thinking spaces. That's my dedicated space, especially since becoming a mum. You know, it's just, I find it so beneficial to just have that dedicated space to go there and think again, think about my work again, and kind of remember how I feel as a person.
Yeah, you lose that sometimes.
Connect back to myself and get back to my inquiry. And obviously now I know that they are so productive. They're incredibly productive spaces for me, because it is that dedicated space which I don't really have outside of the residencies now. So it's not, so they are way more valuable to me since becoming a mum.
Yeah. So how does it actually work, Tiffany, that you go to a place, not necessarily where you're living, could be another country? How does it actually happen? How do you make it happen?
I'm usually invited, or I apply for them. Yeah, so I only do residencies that are paid, for obvious reasons. Sometimes they're connected to an outcome. So the one that I was on in Taiwan recently, the work that we made there went into the first feminist show in Taiwan, and we needed the entire 3 months to make that work, because again, it was social practice. We were working with women's communities. So, and it had been developed in 2 stages. The first part of it was developed on the residency in Thailand in 2018. That residency, I actually had both my children with me. My son was 5 months old and my daughter was 3.5. So that we were in Thailand for 5 months together then. And that was, so this work that has come about has really come about since I have been a mother, of looking at the way that women's art is viewed, and how our art is quite segregated from like the mainstream collection space. I think the demographic is that there's 5% of women's artwork in the collections of museums and public galleries in the world. So when we look at art history as a marker for our human evolution, it's very much through the lens of the male gaze only. So that was really interesting to me, but also looking at how tradition and knowledge, and Indigenous knowledge especially, is handed down orally through the woman lineage from mothers to daughters. and looking at how largely a lot of that manifests as craft, and how craft has been seen as separate from fine art. So it's been left out of that conversation, but it's incredibly important. And mostly craft is related to the domestic. So you've got quilting, you've got baskets, you've got weaving, you've got all of these things that are strongly related and connected to the domestic. So Taiwan was really interesting because it's in the 60s, late 60s, Taiwan did a thing, and I remember it, called the Living Room Factory. And you will remember in the 70s and the 80s that we used to get all of the things out of Taiwan. They used to have those tiny little gold stickers on the backs of them, made in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So that was an initiative by the government. And what that did was that every family had a product that they made in their living room, and they got paid for that. So that was really the beginning of women's liberation through making in Taiwan into financial independence. So myself and my Taiwanese collaborator were looking at how craft, or specifically embroidery and sewing and quilting, has become a key element to women's liberation over time. So, but also the symbols that it holds in it, and the knowledge that it holds in it, and the oral traditions that are usually passed down in the process of teaching that. So what we were doing was working with women's communities. We started working with the Hmong refugee community in Thailand, because if you are a refugee in Thailand, you can live there, but you can't work there. So for the community, it's mainly women, because the men are still in whatever country they're in. So the women and the children are refugees in Thailand. A lot of them have children and they can't work. So what we were doing was commissioning them to be able to make their textile piece at home with their children together, to supplement their income, but also enable them to work from home. So it was really interesting, because the work that they made was just so incredibly beautiful and so loaded, with like the symbology and the histories. And so we take those works, and then we worked with the women's tribe in Taiwan, and down in Taitung, these women are the same DNA as Maori. So there's a direct connection between Taiwan and Aotearoa there. So it was really fascinating working with the women and using their textiles and listening to their conversations and their narratives. And then we take the textile, the traditional textile, and then we turn that into a contemporary artwork. So what we did was take all of the different embroidery, quilting, all of the textile works, and we made a house out of it that was based on the architecture of the marae, and also the traditional buildings in Taiwan. So that there was the same visual link there to their community houses, to the marae. So, and then we project onto the house, onto the textile that all the women have made, the films from working with both women's communities, so that the backstory of how the house is made is embedded into that, in the process, and the histories and the stories. So yeah, it's really, really traditionally made, but then it's a very, very contemporary work when it's installed. So any works like that, you need the full 3 months to do it, because you're working with the communities, you're building trust, and you've got to then take their work and then remake your own work with that work. So it's quite an in-depth process.
When you're busy as a mum, I mean, when do you get the thinking time? I mean, do you have a portion of that residency where you can just sort of stop and do the thinking and then figure out how it's going to work, or do you kind of go in there running with the idea?
A little bit of both, because we worked with the Hmong's women's community in Thailand in 2018. Myself and my collaborator have kind of developed this project now. So our goal, like ideally what we would like to do is go to different countries and work with different communities and keep making multiple houses, you know, in the same architecture that resonates to their culture, and then have essentially a community of houses all made out of the textile from the women's communities.
And what actually happens to that house? Is it up somewhere for people to see for a period of time and then comes down?
Yes. So it was up for 4 months. I think the work's just come down. The show's just ended in the Taitama Fine Arts Museum. So it's just come down. And then it was repurposed and reinstalled for Bangkok Fashion Week because it was all textile. Brilliant. Now we have it and we will re-show it again. Hopefully with another house. Yeah.
And I'd like to think that craft is becoming more valued as a fine art. I mean, we are seeing more of those kind of industries coming through into fine art. But,
absolutely. I think it's just that conversation around value of being aware of the histories associated to it and the narratives and the oral traditions that are embedded in it, which have been easy to be overlooked because it's been such a male-dominated space. But I think kind of retextualizing our role within that has been really critical, and therefore there's more visibility around that.
Yeah, which is good. And you're doing a lot towards making that happen for sure. What about Shadows of the Awakened collaboration?
Oh yeah, that's pretty special. Yeah, of course.
I love that
with the amazing Miss Ella Brewer, who I just adore and am still working with across countries. We now send each other works, which is kind of cool. So this work was kind of, Ella is she's traditionally trained in Tibetan thangka painting, the Buddhist form. So we were having a conversation because those works, when they're fully realized, are considered enlightened artworks that hold the deity and the energy of the deity, so you can use them for prayer and for altars and offerings. But you really have to understand Buddhism quite deeply to understand the symbology and the meaning and be very respectful to the work. So we wanted to create another series of works to open out that space of offering and domestic altars, for people to have sacred objects as artworks in their houses without having to take their vows and go down the full route of Buddhism. So we created the Shadows of the Awakened series, which is a pared back, stripped back, it's almost a shadow of the enlightened works. So that's why the title is called that. So they are based on the Buddhist forms, and then all of the materials that are used in the works are the offerings to the gods themselves. So I grow the flowers and I press the flowers myself, and then we use earth and different muds and pure silver and pure gold and water, and that's it. That's the only materials in the work. So, and we create those works, and had been doing so for a couple of years, just really for our own selves, experimenting on where we could go with them and what they look like, and working through how that works, because it was really difficult for Ella initially to strip them back like that. To lose so much information and to really pare them back. It was quite a challenge for her because her work is so detailed and so intricate. And also for me, I didn't know if I felt like I had permission to be working in that space with those forms as well, because they are the sacred forms. So we both had to go through a process of, I'd studied Buddhism, and Ella's gone through her process of trust with me. And now we've got to a stage where I think the works are really, really quite beautiful, and they really do hold that energy and resonance. And then 2 years ago, His Holiness the Dalai Lama released an album called Inner World. So his album is his mantra and his voice with contemporary music that was made by New Zealand musicians. And it's an incredibly special album. I'm not sure if you've listened to it, but if you haven't, it's just hearing His Holiness's voice, and there's indigenous instruments, and it's just something else. So when they were creating that work, they wanted artwork that was inclusive, that to bring it into a new audience, to open it out to a contemporary audience with the contemporary music and the contemporary art. So Ella and I were commissioned to create a work for each track. So when you if you Google Inner World and you bring it up on YouTube, the images are our animated artworks, so that they have become meditation aids. So they move. So the head auras and the bodies, they move in timing with the breath, so that it's a contact point to listen to His Holiness and to focus on the breath and go in to the deity for the mantra. So we created 12 different artworks, one for each track.
That's amazing.
And it's been an incredibly beautiful process, and obviously an amazing partnership with His Holiness, and to be able to have the work validated in that space, and again to see it bringing benefit. It's that same wellbeing education location. So even though it's not social practice per se, it's the role that it has and the outcome of what the works are doing are still very much within that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are on paper, those works, aren't they?
They are on paper.
Yeah, which is different for you, isn't it?
Very.
Yeah.
So but there is something about growing the flowers and the cycle, the way the works are made, with the earth, the water, the flowers and the mud, and the silver and gold, that they're very precious. They're incredibly precious. So they are offerings for themselves. For us, we see them as it's an offering. In the process, that they're all blessed, all the materials are blessed. It's a very considered process to bring the works into the world.
Yeah. So those works have been used alongside the music. And what's happened to them now? Is that something that people could actually purchase to take home?
We do print, and we still, but we do have a couple of the originals left, but and then we do the hybrid prints, so that it's a print of the original work, and then we repaint and repress flowers back into that, so that every work is still unique and different and an original, even though it's taken from the print's reworked again, which is a really lovely process. So it's everyone is still an original.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I mean, your practice is just so incredibly varied, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it is. It's not intentional.
Ideas, but you come up with so many different ways of, connecting people and building relationships and educating and empowering.
It's all the same thing. It just manifests really differently for the right space. But it's if I kind of look at the core essence of what I do, it is all the same. It all comes from the same place. The intention is all the same. It just, the iterations and the aesthetics seem to just slightly shift.
Yeah, depending on where you are and who you're working with, I guess. And how do you find that sort of ephemeral aspect of your work, of much of your work, that, it doesn't always stay? I mean, obviously you have record of it, but do you find it hard to kind of let go or see your work kind of disperse?
No, because I'm Buddhist. So that's really, it makes way more sense to me, in that, that holding the truth of impermanence, and all things shall pass, and that everything has its own lifetime of benefit, and then it can move on. So no, that's fine. That's in some ways part of it. That it's a moment in time, that it's experiential, that there's something super beautiful about that as well, that every time that you come back and encounter a work, it's changed, it's different. So it's not the same thing all the time. Like even total internal reflection, you could visit it every day and it would have been different every day through the participation of it. So that I think a lot of my Buddhist practice comes through the work. A lot of my belief systems and a lot of my intentions, the work and the practice, the arts practice and my Buddhist practice are very closely connected. You may not see that, but I think it's more about the backstory of the intention or how it's created, and the processes in that are very sacred to me, and are very protected. And there's always prayer, there's always the ceremony, there's always the safety for me of putting that spiritual space around it to make sure that the intention and what comes through that space is correct, and has been asked permission of. So I think the two things that are very closely aligned. Whether you would know that at the end of the day, I'm not sure, but in terms of keeping the process protected and making sure that I am ethically facilitating that in the right way, it's a very the arts practice and the Buddhist practice are very closely connected.
I can see that.
I think it's a deep connection to the sacred space. It's a deep connection to the land, and it's a deep connection to people. I think all of those things come through in different ways, of feeling like the whole is, more important than the self. That as much as possible, the ego is removed, that it's not really about what I want to say, it's more about facilitating others. I think probably the philosophy behind what I do is deeply influenced by my ethnicity, for sure. And the more time that I spend with Indigenous cultures, the stronger that comes out. Anywhere in the world, for sure. I think there's so much knowledge in the Indigenous cultures that are deeply connected to the spirit and the land, and to people, and all of those things are vitally important to me. And that, even Indra's bow is a very subtle way of acknowledging that.
And I've seen lots of photos of, particularly your daughter when she was younger, sort of just being a part of what you do, and you obviously really involve your kids in your projects. And how do you find that? Does that sort of influence what you do and the work that you make?
Definitely. The residency in Thailand was based on the challenges that female artists face. I'm not sure I would have got to that same point without children. It was an authentic inquiry. There's also no separation for me in anything. That everything is one. So there's no I go to work and then I come home. There isn't any of that. As much as possible, my children are involved in everything and are a part of everything.
Yeah, it's brilliant that you can give that to your children. So, Tiffany, we are on to our quickfire questions at the end. Can you believe it? It's already been over an hour. It's way past my bedtime, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say it must be. Yeah, how you going?
26. So anyway, I'm still awake. I've had my coffee, so I'm doing well. But I'd be really interested to know who your favourite artists are, or perhaps New Zealand artists, and why. Or can you choose one or two artists that maybe have influenced you?
Yeah, sure. Lisa Rehana, of course, and the Pacific Sisters, of course. such a vital force in the world that is incredibly necessary and needed, and at a very pivotal time to have the voice of strong Pacific identity. Jaehoon, I love his work. I really resonate with his work, the impermanence and bringing through that Korean energy and shamanism is really important. I think that is, that I think potentially the Indian diaspora or the Asian diaspora does not have the same platforms in New Zealand, and I think we need to work on that in terms of inclusion and diversity and the changing face of New Zealand, and acknowledging that there is a huge Asian diaspora within New Zealand and making us feel more represented in that space. Mandrika Rupa, who I recently collaborated with for A Place to Stand, which was the first contemporary Indian art exhibition in New Zealand ever this year, which is kind of crazy. Crazy. She is a force to be reckoned with, and her film work that dates back since the 70s, 80s is phenomenal. And she has one of those people that's come into my life and just really changed the way I see things, and she's been incredibly inspirational to me as a senior Indian artist. I think we do need to work on the Asian representation. I do. So the artists working in that space are really important to me, as my contemporaries also. Just hold on to that, I guess, I guess it was a naivety, which we often speak of as a negative. But I think in some ways, I think that it was actually really beneficial to just have that belief in the power of art and people, and that, just to hold on to that.
Hold on to it, yeah. Totally. I agree. Yeah, especially with the kind of work that you do. It's just, it must be one of those things, the kind of practice where you're not just making, but you're having to think about all the other things that need to happen.
There's a lot of give.
Yeah. And why do you think you make the kind of work that you make?
Because innately I am a creative human, and that is the gift that I have, and I need to try and find a way to be as beneficial and as helpful as I can within that space and the social practice. And this is the only thing I can do that makes me feel like I'm being useful in the world and helping people make a difference, whether that's as small as it is, it's something.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think you're doing really important stuff, and it's amazing, and it's so visually beautiful at the same time.
I just want to be useful. I just want to try and find a way to support people and the well-being and the education, just be useful in that space, and maybe just bring a conversation to the table that enables people just to open their minds and not be judgmental and try and see things from a different perspective. And that's a win if I can do that, even if just one person's like, I haven't thought about it like that before, I hadn't considered it from that point of view, then I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely, yeah. And I honestly think your work is doing that. So keep on doing what you're doing.
Keep
going. But thank you so much, Tiffany. It's been such a joy to meet you again and hear more about your practice, which is just so inspirational and amazing. And the work that you're doing with different groups of people, and particularly children, from my point of view, is amazing. So thank you so much for coming to the Creative Matters podcast and for joining us.
You're so welcome.
Or this evening. And have a lovely day. I hope it's not too cold in London today.
The sun is shining. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, well, that's good. All right. Well, take care, and I hope to see you another time.
Of course. Thank you so much.